wake of the Horus Heresy, mankind was left reeling. War had devastated countless worlds and left naught but ashes behind. The armies of man were crippled and weak, the population starving, but worst of all, the Emperor was bound forever into the Golden Throne, his wisdom and benevolence lost. The few scattered survivors turned on each other, old enmities long suppressed by the Emperor's legions surging forth once more. Under the shadow of glorious monuments to victory and towering repositories of learning, men killed each other for mouthfuls of bread and sips of water. Gleaming cities burned, and with no one left to maintain them, most machines rusted away to nothing. Machine tools were used as clubs and workshops as shelters from the rain. All the previous knowledge gathered during the Great Crusade was torn up and used in the struggle to survive. Libraries and archives were looted for firewood, and all the technological achievements of the 1,000 generations were torn down in the anarchy. The only technology that proved resilient enough to survive the carnage were fragments of the STC designs, saved by far-sighted individuals desperate to preserve even the tiniest part of the power humanity once wielded. Amongst the ranks of the army, the rot found true purchase. Previous comrades in arms waged war upon one another, claiming pocket empires wherever they could. Some fought over territory, supplies, and rations, but others fought over nothing more than imagined slights and ancient grudges. Those who should have been leading humanity in this dark hour were at each other's throats. On Terra itself, a new wave of madness arose, fanatical cults gathering together amongst the billions of refugees sheltering under the walls of the Imperial Palace. Demagogues and preachers urged the people to embrace faith in the God Emperor as the path to salvation. Only through supreme sacrifice could they draw his attention and make him stand up from the Golden Throne to lead men once more. Under their cruel lash, they competed to outdo each other in mad acts of devotion, lashing and flagellating themselves for days on end. Men whipped themselves until their backs bled and plunged their hands into naked flames as tests of devotion. They cut out their tongues and gouged out their eyes in an attempt to make the Emperor return, but he still said nothing. Convinced that only greater acts of sacrifice would stir the Emperor, the cults turned on those who would not listen, dragging them from their beds and burning them in mass pyres. Fearful and desperate, the people surged to join the cults, swelling them to the millions, and then they turned on each other. Madness spread through the streets as gangs of cultists hacked and stabbed with crude knives and spears, each more determined to prove that they alone knew the Emperor's will. From out of the darkness came a new threat. A Xenos race, thought long extinct, returned from the shadows of a wilderness space and sought vengeance upon the Imperium that had driven them out. They fell upon the helpless worlds of men and unleashed suffering that eclipsed the worst atrocities of the Horus Heresy. Orcs and Hrud, Demiurge, Phral, Nib, Taidani, Leia, Quietude, Tailstrians, Eldar, Yorgul, Nephilim, and some foes too terrible to name, all returned and revelled in the carnage. In desperation, the people called out to the few surviving loyalist Primarchs to bring their mighty legions to save them as the days of old. Yet, the brothers hardened their hearts and turned their faces away. They were obsessed with reckoning with their traitor kin, blind to all else but vengeance. From Terra, they chased the traitor legions into the galactic north, never ceasing their pursuit, leaving the weak and helpless to die uncared for in their wake. It seemed that mankind's last hour had truly come, that the new day of enlightenment had ended, and all that was left was to huddle around the last flickering firelights as the nights fell upon them. Brother fought brother, and friend fought friend, as all around swarms of Xenos laughed at the folly of man. Despair and violence spread like a virus, infecting all with its taint. Madness was in the air. It everywhere. Yet even now, there were those who held that humanity, the great species that had risen from the ashes of its own extinction, could fight this new enemy. A valiant band of brothers who gazed upon the galaxy of death and horror, yet knew no fear. They were the Ultramarines, the last viable fighting force left in the galaxy. Chapter 2: Ultramar Endures. From his mighty fortress on Macragge, the Primarch Roboute Guilliman gazed out upon the war-torn Imperium and knew the galaxy was already lost. He vowed to take it back. Yet he knew that no single attack could change the course of this war. Theoretically, humanity was beset by 1,000 different foes, so there was no central leadership to target, nor a head to cut off the beast. Practically now, Guilliman embraced the unthinkable and split his legion into hundreds of different splinters, sending each out to rescue key worlds from the darkness. To guide them without his presence, he gifted them with his new philosophy on tactics and warfare, his epic masterpiece, the CODEX Astartes. The Space Marines had never bothered with such tactics before. Since their inception, their campaigns had always been based on pride and genetic superiority, simply charging through their enemies' strongest bastions and daring them to even try and stand against the storm. That had to change, and the new philosophy was war unlike any Astartes had ever fought before, using coordination and strategy to turn small yet diverse forces into a power beyond the sum of its parts. If Guilliman was conservative in his selection of assets, he was calculating in their disposal. If a position could not be held, Guilliman commanded his Marines to fall back to better ones. If a fortress could not be taken, he simply bypassed it. He knew when to stand, when to withdraw, and when to strike with every weapon at his command. Armed with a new philosophy and unprecedented levels of autonomy, the Ultramarines commanders set out into the galaxy. On countless worlds, the 13th Legion fell upon their foes with lightning blitzkrieg assaults that tore out the heart of the foes. At the Higara Point, they saved the armies of the Vestroyans from an overwhelming Orc war. On Kallax, they gutted the manufactories of the Dark Mechanicum. The pirate princes of the Eldar were smashed between the hammer of the Astartes battle barges and the anvil of the Battlefleet Solar. The captured donjons of Perimunda were torn down in a single night of furious assault. Amongst the stars of the Heliopolis Ark, the Pharaoh's slaves were captured and executed in a stealth infiltration led by the Ultramarines captain, Aethon. Their last sight being the mysterious monoliths they worshipped destroyed by melter bombs and the supposedly invincible metal men of their armies simply phasing away. Planet after planet saw the tread of Ultramar's boot, yet wherever they set foot, the Marines would not stay long. As soon as the course of the war had been turned, they would set off once more into the stars, heading for the next crisis. The Ultramarines were everywhere in this dark time, but the tide of horror was beyond comprehension. Too many worlds needed salvation, and there were not enough Space Marines to save them all. So great was the demand for their skills that the Astartes abandoned their auxiliary human regiments to fight on alone, pressing on from war zone to war zone with breakneck speed. Guilliman responded in the most chillingly ruthless fashion. He personally calculated the strategic value of each world, and those deemed unimportant were simply abandoned to their fate. Many generals and lords of the Imperium cried out against the harsh callousness of this policy, but Guilliman was resolute. The Astartes could no longer be the sledgehammer of the Imperium, he claimed. They must become more precise, more tactical. The Space Marines were too valuable to waste fighting for unimportant worlds. They must spend their skills where they were needed most, and then move on. Even then, the Ultramarines could not keep pace with the sheer scope of the calamity set before them. For every world they saved, 10 more would slide into darkness. In desperation, Roboute Guilliman split his Ultramarines down further and further. From battalion strength, they split down to mere chapters, then companies, and finally into mere squads. They sought to meet the enemy with fury and steel wherever they reared their foul heads. It was not enough. Chapter 3. Attrition. Explosions tore at the battlefield, turning a pleasant field into a hellstorm of mud, filth and noise. All around were screams and barks of bolter fire as post-humans grappled and died unremarked and unforgotten. In the midst of the carnage sat the outlandish shape of a Damocles command rhino with its distinctive Vox relay standing miraculously unscathed as the very air around it filled with fire and blood spray. Inside the armoured tank sat a legionary master of signal, hunched over a strategium hololith that took up most of the room inside, with the thick trunk of an MIU running into the base of his skull. In the midst of war, he sat as calmly as a man reading a good book, or taking in a fine sunset, seemingly unperturbed by the explosions rocking the rhino every few seconds. Yet his fingers twitched constantly as his mind sorted through thousands of inputs, passing and retransmitting data from an entire war zone. At the same time, his voice constantly droned on, dropping snatches of conversation in a flat, monotone timbre, as if he was distracted by dozens of conversations at once.
91st Errant Dragoons, brace for impact. Supporting orbital bombardment incoming to your sector in 90 seconds. Legionary squads, Farrant and Sidham, you're about to be overrun. Fall back to territory defence line. 75th Artillery Battery, redirect Earthshakers to target Traitor Advance in Grid Sector 586, Mark 638. Marauder Squadron, 475, abort attack run immediately. You are bombing friendly positions. Repeat, abort run, abort run. Theatre Command, Squadron 475 has gone off mission and is not responding. Redesignate Squadron 475 as excommunicate traitorous.
Into this serenity pounded the heavy stomp of a legionary in full plate. He was a towering giant, even among Space Marines. His helmet was stained blood red as a mark of his seniority, and the rest of his armour was stained red as a sign of the death he had seen and wrought on that day.
There you are, Valaxian. Where is Captain Gregorian? We have pushed back the traitors, but we need him here to lead the counterattack. Captain Gregorian has been out of contact for 13 minutes, Sergeant Targarin,
replied the Valaxian in the same monotone voice as before, not even stirring from his conscious manipulation of the data flow.
13 minutes?
Boomed Talgarn.
Then he's as good as dead, and us with him. Chain of command has been restored momentarily,
replied the Valaxian calmly.
Until then, the new Codex doctrines clearly outline the proper procedures for this situation.
Codex procedures? Barked Talgarn, ripping free his helm to reveal a face covered with fresh scars and blood, not all of it his own. His snarling features revealed a man who had seen too many good friends die in one day, and not yet wrought enough death to smother the pain. The legendary discipline of the 13th Legion was frayed to breaking point and hung by the thinnest of threads as he roared,
"Don't speak to me about this bloody Codex!"
He gestured to the Strategium, taking up the bulk of the rhino, and declared,
"They sent us up against the 16th Legion here, the fething sons of Horus, the thrice-cursed abortions of the dead, and damned war masters. What did they give us to match that? Human troops, a meagre 1,000 legionnaires, and a detestable book. A mere 1,000 Space Marines? How could anyone expect us to conquer a whole world with so few men?"
He continued his tirade, not giving the Valaxian a chance to interrupt.
"We followed those damn Codex prescriptions, and what did we get? Our army scattered across continents, abandoning sound positions and falling back to useless ones. Our supporting artillery is stranded out of range, our assault units are sitting in bunkers, tactical squads are falling back inch by blood-soaked inch."
Are you questioning the Primarch's orders?
Interrupted the Valaxian, fiercely, his voice showing emotion for the first time as the blasphemous rage penetrated his legionary hypno-conditioning.
"Question them?"
laughed Targan.
"I spit upon them. This is a pathetic charade of the wars the 13th once fought. Where is the glory? Where is the pride? This is not a war. This is a meat grinder."
This is our Primarch's will!
His own temper finally rising to the fore.
We were entrusted with the work of Gilliman's own hand, and we should be honoured to follow its wisdom.
Open your eyes,
shouted Talgan.
These prescriptions will see us all dead. We have to take the initiative now, not sit here quoting chapter and verse.
The Codex Astartes does not allow us to engage in reckless bouts of vainglory,
snouted the Valaxian.
We hold here and have faith in its wisdom to see us through.
This is insanity,
thundered Talgan.
Do you really think any man, even a Primarch, can prepare a solution for every conceivable event on the battlefield? Damn it all to the warp, how are we supposed to fight a war using an accursed book?
Never question Robuta Gilliman in front of me, snarled
Valaxian, rising from the hololith, fists clenched in outrage. Talgan snarled, his discipline a hair's breadth from snapping, but stopped, for something had changed on the strategium between them. The swirling, scattered units were starting to pull together in a curious pattern. The rampaging traitor marines were now scattered across the continent, isolated and vulnerable, but the ultramarines themselves were what drew his eyes. Previously falling back units were linking up with seemingly lost assets. In moments, fire bases and strong points had sprung up out of nowhere, while previously lost artillery and air bases were now in perfect position to rain down destruction. Talgan saw assault companies in perfect alignment to crush the enemy and tactical support poised, ready to fly in.
What am I seeing? Whispered Talgan.
Quite simply, the most breathtaking piece of strategic maneuver either of us will ever witness,
replied Valaxian, equally awed.
How did the Codex do this?
Asked Talgan, not quite able to believe the evidence of his own eyes.
I have absolutely no idea,
replied Valaxian, returning to his position at the strategium table.
But you had better get your squads into the fight before the sons of Horus realize what has happened.
Talgan wasted not a moment as he marched down the ramp yelling orders, save to marvel at the genius of his Primarch and think for a moment that perhaps there was yet cause to hope.